Massachusetts has the nation's lowest death rate from gun violence and some of the most restrictive gun laws. But there's still a problem with that violence in Boston's neighborhoods with guns imported from states where the laws are much weaker. For the past 25 years, there's been a campaign to strengthen those laws here and around the country, led by the local group Stop Handgun Violence, best known for billboards along the Mass Turnpike. To tell us about the group's efforts and its anniversary is one of the founders, John Rosenthal. Thank you very much for being with us again, John.
Thanks for having me back.
John, go back to the beginnings here in the 1990s. What made you start this group?
So I bought this parking garage on the Massachusetts Turnpike, and I've been a gun owner my whole adult life. I skeet shoot, I have a shotgun. It's locked. I lock the ammunition separate like every really responsible gun owner should. It occurred to me that there were like 250,000 impressions, people driving by the garage every day. And I had learned that 15 kids under 19 died each and every day, including 106 Americans every single day from gun violence. And I started to do some research and looked back to about 1968 and learned that more Americans have died from gun violence in this country since 1968 than all U.S. servicemen and women killed in all foreign wars combined. And there was no background check requirement. Unlike toy guns that are regulated, teddy bears are regulated, real guns are not. And it was a gun violence epidemic largely by design. So I decided, in order to sell guns, in order to increase fear and sell guns. And so I set out to try and change the conversation about how can we reduce injuries and deaths from guns without banning most guns. And that's what Michael Kennedy and I did, starting in 1994.
Now, one of the things you're onto at that early stage, and we see more of this lately with a lot of the survivors groups as well, is you're putting a face on this issue. Isn't that what you're doing?
We did. So Michael Kennedy, whose father was Robert F. Kennedy, his uncle was President Kennedy, and he was one of my best friends. So together we started Stop Handgun Violence in order to change the conversation from the polar extremes of unlimited access to guns like exists in this country still today, and banning guns, which is never going to happen. And I don't think that's the solution. So we crafted a strategy so that urban Massachusetts could prove to the nation that you could reduce injuries and deaths from guns without banning them. And since 1994, we built the billboards that you referred to. We changed the laws affecting gun owners, gun dealers, gun manufacturers. We became the first state in the nation to require consumer safety standards for gun manufacturing. And we've reduced the rate of gun deaths in Massachusetts by 40%. And we are now an urban state with the lowest gun death rate in the nation. We have proven the NRA's worst nightmare. Gun laws save lives without banning most guns.
When I look at stats from around the world, one thing that I seem to see there is that if you look at countries or states with more poverty, or if you look at countries that have more political instability, there's a lot more gun violence. I mean, do the conditions reflect the guns, or do guns maybe just reflect conditions?
It's a great question. Clearly there's more to be done because 2/3 of all gun crime that will happen today and every day in Massachusetts are with guns from out of state, from the 32 states that don't require even a criminal background check for gun sales. So not to give anybody any great ideas, but you could drive to New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont, and a total of 32 states and buy 1,000 AR-15 assault rifles and 1,000 easily concealed handguns without a background check or detection, cash and carry, today and every day, buying from private gun dealers who are not regulated. Federally licensed gun dealers who fill out a form, have a background check, pay a $250 fee, and now can have an unlimited number of guns sent to their home. They don't need a place of business like here in Massachusetts, but everywhere else in the country, just send them to your home. They have to run a background check if they're a federally licensed gun dealer. They sell about 50% of guns each year. Private gun dealers who don't fill out paperwork, who don't have a background check, can sell guns without any ID or background check, simply cash and carry because they're private dealers. So everybody that can't pass a background check in Massachusetts knows. You just go to Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. So and those guns and that huge loophole that you could drive a Sherman tank through is what's fueling the gun violence in our primarily 3 urban neighborhoods in Boston: Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan. That's where all the gun violence happens, because it's easier to get a gun than to get a job because of poverty, because of racism. And the gun laws in Massachusetts aren't really effective in reducing that gun violence, because until we create a level playing field for all jobs, access to jobs, and get federal gun policies so that you can't drive to Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont and buy guns without an ID, we're going to continue to see gun violence in our urban areas. It's solvable. Every other country has figured it out. I mean, we have more gun violence in America than the 26 industrialized nations combined, because they don't allow unrestricted access to guns without detection by law enforcement. They have mentally ill people too. I mean, there's a mass shooting of 4 more people every single day in America. 100 people will die today from guns, and 150 will be injured, and there will be a mass shooting today. It's happening somewhere. And that's because we have unrestricted access to guns, and we allow people to buy them without detection by law enforcement.
I'm imagining somebody could buy a series of guns legally with background checks, and then sneak in the night, sell them to somebody else who comes up into a neighborhood and sells them illegally again. What's to stop that from happening? Is there a law that can deal with that?
It's called straw purchasing. Yeah, the law would be that if you buy a gun and sell it privately, like is perfectly legal in this country, but if we had a law that said secondary sales, private gun sales, had to go through the same background check requirement as first-time gun sales through dealers, you would pretty much close that loophole. Every gun sold in America should undergo a background check.
Now, with mass shootings, we often hear the story, it's somebody who has mental health problems. The gun maybe it was legally bought, at least by somebody in the same household. So how do you pinpoint things enough that you can keep the gun out of the hands of somebody who is really disturbed?
So every country has mentally ill people. We just happen to arm them with assault rifles and large capacity ammunition magazines without detection by law enforcement. That's why we have such a rash of mass shootings. There's a mass shooting, every day. There are more days of the year there are more mass shootings than days of the year. So it doesn't happen elsewhere, because elsewhere, every other country doesn't allow unrestricted access to military-style weapons. I mean, the AR-15 used at Parkland was made here in Massachusetts by Smith & Wesson. It is on the list of banned assault weapons, including copycat weapons, here in Massachusetts. That weapon and a lot of the other weapons that Smith & Wesson makes can't even be sold in this state. That weapon uses a .223 round. After Sandy Hook, I was on MSNBC with General McChrystal, and he said, "John, do you realize what the .223 round is designed to do?" And I said, "No, General, tell me." And he said, "It's designed to stop an incoming infantry. The bullet is designed not to penetrate the body, but to hit flesh, tumble, and create maximum soft tissue damage." Now, that is a weapon that was used at Sandy Hook, Parkland, San Bernardino, Las Vegas. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And my friends who lost their 6- and 7-year-olds at Sandy Hook had to identify them by their clothing after they got 3 to 11 rounds from that AR-15 and .223 round.
You recently met here in Boston with one of the survivors of the Parkland shooting in Florida, and the victim was Joaquin Oliver. He was on one of your billboards. Talk about the message there and why that message is true.
So I met Joaquin Oliver's parents, Manuel and Patricia, when we organized a march from Worcester to Springfield with the March for Our Lives student movement from Florida, and now it's expanding around the country, including here in Massachusetts. And Manny and Patricia fled Venezuela because of the violence, picked the best school system in all of Florida to raise their kids and have their kids go to school. And their 17-year-old son was murdered at Parkland on Valentine's Day with an AR-15 made here in Massachusetts by Smith & Wesson. Again, they became aware that Massachusetts was the model for gun violence prevention, that we had the most comprehensive gun laws and the lowest gun death rate. And I told Manny about the fact that I've been developing these billboard media public awareness campaigns that have helped change laws here and made us the safest state in the nation, even though we're an urban state. And he said, do you think we could do a billboard together? And I said, absolutely, you design it. And Manny and Patricia came up with that message. It's a beautiful picture of their son Joaquin, their only son. And it says, quote, if I had chosen to go to school in Massachusetts instead of Parkland, Florida, I would likely be alive today. And the sad part is, that's absolutely true. We take for granted how safe we live here in Massachusetts as a result of our gun laws, which are a result of good bipartisan leadership and the passage of effective gun laws and the enforcement of those laws by our Attorney General. It doesn't have to be like this. We have proven that you can live in an urban state and you can reduce injuries and deaths from guns without banning them for law-abiding citizens and have the lowest gun death rate in the nation, because we simply treat guns like the inherently dangerous product they are, just like automobiles. Think about this. We give our law enforcement officers, in order to protect us, we give our law enforcement officers a handgun with 13 to 17 rounds. Yet Congress allows anyone without a background check to buy a 30 to 100 round magazine without having to reload. Police die when they have to reload, and Congress is arming people, mentally ill, felons, who can buy these weapons without detection in order to outgun cops. And by the way, I've hunted. I'm a skeet shooter. When you hunt in America, and the NRA has no problem with this, and the Republicans in Congress have no problem with this, when you hunt, you have to get a hunting license, anywhere in America. And when you get a hunting license and you hunt deer, you're limited to 5 rounds. If you hunt duck, you're limited to 3 rounds to protect the duck and deer population. You want to hunt humans? No limit.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with John Rosenthal from Stop Handgun Violence. John, as you probably are well aware, I think there are millions of people with these military-style weapons in this country right now. We've recently heard Congressman Beto O'Rourke saying we're going to come for those weapons and take them away. Is that practical, do you think?
No, and I don't think he helped our cause. Look, after there was one mass shooting in Australia with an AR-15, the Australian government said, starting on a certain date, we are buying those weapons back. We're not confiscating them, we're buying them back. They haven't had a mass shooting since. When New Zealand had the horrific mass shooting a couple of years ago, they did the same thing. They just bought them back. And it was a lot cheaper than the billions we're paying in medical costs for uninsured gunshot victims. So, do I think that there's a need for military-style assault weapons in a civilized society other than to kill a lot of people quickly? Absolutely not. Do most law-abiding gun owners have military-style assault weapons? Absolutely not. Do I think we will ultimately get to the place where we are renewing the ban on military-style weapons and offering to buy them back? I do think we're going to get that, because there's a mass shooting of every single day. The common denominator in those mass shootings are these weapons of war. They are not designed for sport. They are not designed for hunting. And they're barely designed for self-protection because they're hard to use. I mean, you want to self-protect yourself with a weapon, get a shotgun. It has a huge spray. You don't get a military-style weapon that you need to have a target really closely, or a handgun, which you have to be so close in order to have that be effective. So Beto O'Rourke, I think, was an off-the-cuff thing. I don't think it's practical. I don't think it's going to happen. But I do think it would help stop mass shootings. If we really care about stopping mass shootings, we'll stop selling these weapons and we'll offer to buy them back.
Of course, I also want to ask you, now that we're at year 25, how are you going to mark that exactly?
Well, it's, it's sweet and bitter. It's sweet because we set out to prove that gun laws can save lives without banning most guns. We're an urban state with the lowest gun death rate. We reduced the rate of gun deaths by 40%. And if that's one of your kids, that really matters. And we don't have the gene to bury our children and ever be the same. But at the same time, it's been 25 years. And in those 25 years, over 850,000 Americans have died from largely preventable gun violence because spineless members of Congress have chosen, this is a choice, they have chosen blood money campaign contributions or lack of a backbone to be intimidated by a special interest gun lobby over public health and safety.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Let me just say one more thing, if I can.
John. Yeah.
If you're interested in being a part of this movement to stop gun violence, you can join Stop Handgun Violence, the March for Our Lives. Go to stophandgunviolence.org. Some generous donors have decided to triple match anyone who makes a donation to Stop Handgun Violence. So that's stophandgunviolence.org. And join this movement, because one of the things that is saddest for me about all this is meeting parents of dead children every week here in Massachusetts and around the country. And we are not safe because our Congress and our president don't care about public health and safety. They only care about their own self-interest in staying in Washington, and they're afraid of the NRA. So even though we live in the safest state and it's less likely to happen here, it's going to happen here, and it could happen at the mall, at the school, or anywhere else as a result of unrestricted access to guns in 32 states, including bordering states, Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, where the guns are coming from.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
John Rosenthal from Stop Handgun Violence.